When Taehyung announces his 2026 wedding, fans rejoice until Jungkook says, "It's too late now," shaking the fandom forever. The glass slipped from Jungkook's hand the moment the words left Taehyung's mouth. "I'm getting married in the fall." The sound of the glass shattering on the cold, marble floor didn't compare to the silence that followed. Cameras stopped clicking. Stylists froze mid-touch-up. A collective breath, held by everyone in the room, never fully exhaled. But it wasn't Taehyung's announcement that stopped Jungkook's world. It was the way Taehyung smiled afterward. Soft, sincere, unaware. Like it was a normal thing. Like nothing between them had ever happened. Jungkook stood stiff in his black rehearsal outfit, hands trembling slightly as cold water soaked into the fabric of his pants. His jaw twitched. His eyes, usually sharp with warmth, glazed over. His mind didn't react instantly. It sank slowly, agonizingly, like a stone dropped into an endless sea of memories. "Hyung." His voice came out as a whisper, hoarse, dry, barely audible. But Taehyung was already laughing with the makeup team, brushing off congratulations like it was all part of a game. Jungkook watched his side profile, studied the curl of his lips, the way his fingers tugged at his sleeves when nervous. It was the same. It was always the same. Only now, something had ended. Later that night, backstage, Jungkook found himself alone in the hallway, staring at the emergency exit sign glowing red above a door that led to nowhere. He could hear the soft echo of laughter behind him, Taehyung's, and hers, the woman he was going to marry. She was kind, beautiful even, but she wasn't supposed to be the one. Jungkook had told himself 1,000 times he was over it, that their silence had been mutual, that it wasn't love if it was never said out loud. But it had been loud in his heart. It had screamed in the way his hands reached for Taehyung in the dark, in how he memorized the other's sleeping face during long plane rides, in how his chest tightened whenever they stood too close and someone walked in. It had been everything he never dared to say, and now it was too late. He didn't cry. Not yet. The press conference the next morning was chaos. Flashbulbs, questions, speculation. When asked if the group would perform at the wedding, Namjoon laughed diplomatically. Yoongi gave a vague nod, and Jimin offered a sweet smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then, the reporter turned to Jungkook. "Will you be attending Taehyung's wedding?" He didn't flinch, didn't blink. "It's too late now," Jungkook said. A hush fell over the room. Camera zoomed in. Taehyung's smile faltered just slightly, but Jungkook caught it. He always did. No one knew what it meant. Not fully. But ARMY did. The fans knew. The fan edits, the backstage glances, the lyrics, the whispers. They remembered everything. The way Jungkook once looked at Taehyung like he hung the moon. The way they vanished after award shows only to appear hours later. Breathless, disheveled, eyes shining. In the days that followed, theories spread like wildfire. Taehyung didn't post anything. Jungkook didn't either. But what burned more was that neither denied it, neither clarified, and so silence became the loudest answer of all. Jungkook isolated himself in his studio. He pushed through 3 songs in one night, his voice cracking on every final note. Lyrics bled out of him raw, unsanitized, and brutally honest. One track titled Soul 2 AM became an underground fan anthem. No names were mentioned, but the pain was unmistakable. Fans dissected every line. "You left the room, but I was still in it. I stayed. You forgot I was there." Taehyung, meanwhile, was seen out with his fiancée, smiling, laughing. But something in his eyes looked off, absent. Interviews became colder. He brushed off questions. Even the wedding date became vague. Autumn, then maybe winter, then nothing at all. ARMY noticed. They always did. Jimin confronted Jungkook in the practice room one night after dance rehearsal. His hair clung to his damp forehead, chest rising and falling as he spoke without restraint. "You still love him." Jungkook didn't deny it. He just looked down at his calloused palms and said, "I never stopped." "But you never told him. It wouldn't have changed anything." "You don't know that." "I do now." The wedding venue was set in Jeju, secluded, coastal, surrounded by cliffs and ocean winds. Jungkook didn't RSVP, but he flew to Jeju anyway, alone, with no intention of showing up. Just being nearby. He stayed in a small guest house overlooking the beach. At night, he lit a cigarette. He didn't smoke, let it burn out between his fingers. Watched the waves crash and whispered Taehyung's name into the dark. On the day of the wedding, clouds rolled in. Army waited for photos, for clips, for anything. But there was no live stream, no dispatch leaks, just silence. Until someone posted a grainy photo of Taehyung standing at the altar. Alone. The bride never showed up. Rumors spiraled. Some said she got cold feet. Others claimed she found something out. But those who looked closer noticed one thing. Taehyung was holding a letter. Creased. Faded. And Army ever observant recognized the handwriting on it from an old behind-the-scenes clip when Jungkook had written song lyrics for Taehyung's birthday. Neither man said a word to the press. Not that day. Not the day after. A week later, Jungkook released another song. No promotions. No video. Just a piano track. And a line that shattered the fandom. You were supposed to be mine in every lifetime. But I let the time pass like I had forever. Taehyung liked the post, and then, without a caption, posted a photo of the sea. Two silhouettes stood near the edge of the cliff. No faces, just hands intertwined. Some said it was an old photo. Others believed it was taken that day. No one knows for sure, but Army felt it. They always did. Jungkook hadn't slept. The ocean outside his window had lost its calming rhythm, the sound now just a constant static against the hollow ache in his chest. He sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, back pressed against the cool wooden panel of the wall. The letter Taehyung had held at the altar, the one no one was supposed to see, was the one Jungkook had written months ago, never meant to be read. He had left it inside the piano in their old practice studio, tucked under the cover, hidden beneath the worn sheet music they never played anymore. The letter was raw, bleeding truths he never dared to say aloud. It was never a confession, it was a goodbye, and somehow, it had ended up in Taehyung's hands. He wondered if Taehyung had searched for it, if he had known where to look, or if fate had simply decided that silence had overstayed its welcome. The sound of a knock pulled him from his thoughts. Not a soft one. Urgent. 3 short raps, followed by a pause, then 2 more. The rhythm was familiar, so painfully familiar, that it made his breath catch. He didn't move at first. His body refused to believe it, but the knock came again, more insistent. Jungkook pushed himself up slowly, heart slamming against his ribs, and crossed the small room to open the door. Taehyung stood on the other side, hair windblown, shirt slightly damp from the sea spray, eyes bloodshot but wide and alive. You weren't going to come. His voice was flat, but beneath it, a tremor. I wasn't invited. Jungkook's voice was quieter than he intended. Taehyung blinked. You knew you didn't need one. They stood in silence, the open door between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross anymore. The tension was suffocating heavy with everything unsaid, everything hidden for years. Finally, Jungkook stepped aside, letting him in without a word. Taehyung walked slowly, taking in the room, the untouched bed, the untouched food, the notebook lying open on the desk, with half-written lyrics smeared by a careless hand. He turned toward Jungkook, who was still standing by the door, eyes unreadable. I didn't marry her, Taehyung said. I know. She read the letter. She said I looked at it more than I ever looked at her. Jungkook swallowed hard, throat dry. I didn't mean for you to read it. But I did, Taehyung whispered. I read every line, and I realized I wasn't just losing her. I had already lost you. Jungkook looked away, jaw clenched, pain flickering across his face before he could hide it. You never had me. That's not true. You never chose me. Taehyung stepped closer because I was afraid. Because I thought what we had only existed in the spaces between the world's eyes, whispers in hallways, glances in mirrors. I didn't think you'd want to live in that shadow forever. I wouldn't, Jungkook said softly, finally meeting his eyes. That's why I left. The silence between them throbbed. Not empty, but too full. I wanted you to stop me, Jungkook added, voice breaking. When I started pulling away, when I stopped texting first, When I stopped waiting after concerts. I wanted you to stop me. I didn't know how, Taehyung said, his voice barely a breath. I kept waiting for the perfect moment to say something that would fix everything. And then one day I looked up and the moment was gone. Jungkook's lips trembled. It wasn't just a moment, Taehyung. It was times years. Asterisk. Years of hiding. Years of almost. I'm tired of being almost. Taehyung took a shaky breath. What if I'm ready now? Jungkook laughed bitterly. You said that after she left. Not before. Not when it mattered. It still matters to me, Taehyung said, stepping closer. You still matter. Jungkook looked at him, searching for the lie, the hesitation, the shadow of regret. But all he saw was the boy he had loved since the dorm days. Older now, more worn, but still holding that same gaze, soft and stubborn. I don't know if I can go through that again, Jungkook said, voice low. Loving you in silence. Loving you alone. Then don't, Taehyung said. Don't do it alone. Let me say it this time. He stepped even closer, their bodies now inches apart. I loved you then. I love you now. I don't know if this is too late, but I had to try. Jungkook's hand rose slowly, fingers brushing against Taehyung's collar. Why did it take a wedding for you to say this? Taehyung's breath caught. Because watching you disappear from my future hurt more than losing her ever could. The room fell still, time folding in on itself. For a moment, nothing existed except the sound of their breathing and the shared ache between them. Then Jungkook leaned forward, his forehead resting against Taehyung's. I'm still angry, he whispered. I know. I'm still hurt. I deserve that. I still love you. Taehyung closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. Then don't let go this time. They stayed like that, holding onto something fragile, something long buried but never dead. The world outside kept spinning, fan theories spiraling, reporters chasing shadows, but in that small room, time stilled for two souls, finally brave enough to face what they had been too afraid to name. In the weeks that followed, no official statements were made. No interviews. No clarifications. But fans noticed how Jungkook and Taehyung were suddenly seen together again. Quiet dinners, studio sessions, shared smiles that felt like answers. A joint song was teased, a soft ballad filled with layered harmonies and lyrics about second chances. ARMY wept over it. During a live performance at an award show in late 2026, as the final notes of the song faded, Taehyung turned slightly, gaze brushing against Jungkook's. They didn't touch, they didn't speak, but the world saw everything in that look: regret, longing, forgiveness, and something that felt a lot like hope. Jungkook walked off stage first. Taehyung followed. Cameras didn't catch what happened behind the curtains, but a crew member's anonymous post later described it in one line. They didn't kiss. They just held each other like they'd finally come home. The wedding never got rescheduled. Taehyung never posted about it again. Jungkook never released that solo album everyone was waiting for. Instead, they released one project. Together. And it was called Times Too Late Now. Asterisk. But the world understood it wasn't a lament. It was a promise. That this time, they wouldn't wait until it was too late again. Under the dim light of the early morning haze, Jungkook stood alone on the beach. Barefoot in the cold sand, wind tugging at the edges of his hoodie like it was trying to pull him back to a past he wasn't sure he could survive again. The tide crept close, brushing against his toes before slinking away, like it too was afraid to touch the pieces of him that still hadn't healed. His hands were tucked in his pockets, clenched so tightly that his knuckles had gone pale. But it wasn't from the chill, it was the memory, the words, the impossible question that kept echoing inside him. What would have happened if they hadn't let go? Behind him, footsteps slowly crunched on the shore. He didn't turn. He knew it was Taehyung. He could feel him the way you feel, a storm approaching, silent, heavy, electric. I thought you'd be gone by now, Taehyung said, his voice rough, like he hadn't slept either. Jungkook's answer was a small, bitter smile that never reached his eyes. So did I. Taehyung came to stand beside him. close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed, but far enough that it still felt like a decision. They watched the waves crash in silence, not speaking, not needing to. The air between them was saturated with everything unsaid. "I didn't think I'd be this afraid," Taehyung finally said. "Not after everything we've already been through. But standing at that altar, waiting for someone I knew didn't hold my heart, I've never felt more like a liar in my life." "You were never a liar," Jungkook replied quietly. "You just weren't ready to tell the truth." "And now?" Taehyung turned, voice cracking with something dangerously close to vulnerability. "Would you believe me if I said I want to be honest? Even if it's messy? Even if it's too late?" Jungkook exhaled slowly, watching his breath vanish into the cold morning air. "I'm not the same person you fell for back then. I know, neither am I." There was a long pause, filled only by the wind and the sea and the thud of two hearts that had danced around each other for far too long. Jungkook turned to face him. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It wasn't even sad. It was tired. But there was still that flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "Hope. I don't want another secret," Jungkook said. "I can't survive being your shadow again." Taehyung's answer was immediate. "Then don't be. Be my beginning." Jungkook laughed once soft, disbelieving. "That sounds romantic, but it's also naive." Taehyung stepped closer, voice lowering like a promise. "No, it's desperate. I've spent years pretending we were just timing gone wrong. But it wasn't time that failed us, it was fear. Mine. And I'm done letting it win." Jungkook blinked slowly, the fight draining from his posture. "So what now?" "We don't run anymore," Taehyung said. "We stop apologizing for the way we feel. We stop pretending our music doesn't already say everything we've been too afraid to." "You're asking for everything," Jungkook whispered. "I'm offering everything," Taehyung replied. "If you still want it." And for a moment, everything stilled. The world hushed. The water held its breath. And Jungkook finally let himself believe again. Back in Seoul, the rumors swelled like a tidal wave. The wedding cancellation was the storm's eye. But what came after the song drop, the sightings, the cryptic Instagram posts, fueled a wildfire no PR team could contain. Neither of them tried. They let it burn. When Jungkook and Taehyung walked into the studio together the following week, the staff pretended not to stare. The boys didn't say anything. They didn't have to. Jungkook wore a silver ring on a chain around his neck, one that fans recognized as a gift from Taehyung years ago, tucked away and forgotten. But now, it was front and center. Loud, intentional. The song they recorded was slow, haunting, and filled with a kind of tenderness that made everyone who heard it feel like they were intruding on something sacred. Taehyung's voice trembled on the bridge. Jungkook's harmony slid in like a hand reaching out in the dark. In the control room, no one spoke for several seconds after the final note faded. Then someone whispered, "That's not just a comeback, that's a confession." The song charted within hours. Fans wept, others fought. Some called it a PR stunt, but most knew better. ARMY knew what love looked like even when it came disguised in heartbreak and silence. In one of the rare interviews they gave afterward, the host asked, "Was the song based on real events?" Jungkook looked to Taehyung, who simply smiled and said, "It was based on what we could have lost." And Jungkook added, "And what we chose to fight for instead." The internet exploded, but behind the scenes, it was quieter, softer. There were nights spent on rooftops, watching the city hum beneath them. Mornings with black coffee and shared hoodies. Arguments that ended in whispered apologies and bruised smiles. The healing wasn't linear, but it was happening. Taehyung moved into Jungkook's apartment a month later. Not officially. There were still two homes, still separate toothbrushes and separate bathrooms. But he stopped bringing an overnight bag, and Jungkook stopped asking when he was leaving. They performed together again, not as members of a group, but as something unspoken. Something still becoming. One night, after a long rehearsal, Taehyung found Jungkook on the rooftop of their building, staring at the stars. He walked up quietly, then slid an arm around his waist. "Do you think we'll make it?" Taehyung asked. Jungkook leaned into him, voice steady. I think we already are. And maybe they were. Not perfect, not untouched by the past, but together, and no longer hiding. They didn't need a wedding. They didn't need a label. They had the music, the silence between the notes, and each other. The silence in the apartment wasn't oppressive, it was sacred. A low hum from the heater whispered through the vents as Jungkook sat curled on the couch, one leg tucked beneath him, the other stretching just far enough for his toes to brush against the edge of the coffee table. The windows were fogged from the heat inside, meeting the cool dusk outside. On the table lay a pair of mismatched mugs, both half empty. The tea had long since gone cold, but neither of them moved to warm it again. Taehyung was across the room, barefoot on the wooden floor, fingers plucking absently at the neck of his guitar, without playing anything coherent. His eyes weren't on Jungkook, but they weren't on anything else either. There was a fragile sort of domesticity between them now, a rhythm neither of them dared to name. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when Jungkook would flinch if Taehyung walked into a room too quietly. Still times when Taehyung's silence stretched too long, and Jungkook would think he'd changed his mind, that maybe everything was just a fever dream fueled by nostalgia and grief. But then, Taehyung would brush past him in the kitchen, his pinky finger grazing Jungkook's hand, or leave a sticky note with nothing but a small sundoodle and Jungkook's initials on the bathroom mirror. They weren't grand gestures. They were reminders, anchors, quiet reassurances that this time he wasn't going to run. Outside, the sky dimmed to violet as the city buzzed to life, unaware of the two men inside the apartment, of the history folded carefully between them, like an old scarf, worn at the edges but impossible to throw away. Jungkook finally broke the stillness, setting down his mug and rising slowly. His voice was hoarse, low with hesitation, like every word was a step on cracking ice. Do you ever think about what it would have been like if we had never stopped? Taehyung's fingers stilled on the strings. He didn't turn. All the time. And I think we weren't ready. I think we needed to fall apart to know how much it hurt. Jungkook walked toward him, his footsteps soft, uncertain. It still hurts. Taehyung nodded. Yeah, but now it's a hurt I can hold. Before, it was too big, too loud. I didn't know how to love you without being afraid of losing you. Jungkook stopped in front of him. His hands twitched, unsure whether to reach out or stay still. And now, Taehyung finally looked up, his gaze heavy, his eyes shadowed by something deeper than regret. Now I know I'll lose you anyway if I don't love you honestly. The guitar slipped from his hands, landing on the floor with a soft thump. Jungkook's breath hitched as Taehyung stepped forward and took his hand finally, fully, without hesitation. Their fingers tangled naturally, the way they always had, as if time hadn't rusted the muscle memory. They didn't kiss. They didn't even move. They just stood there, forehead to forehead, breath mingling in the quiet space between them. Jungkook closed his eyes. I want to stop waiting for something to go wrong. Taehyung squeezed his hand. Then let's build something that doesn't break so easily. Later that night, they lay on the bed, facing each other. No distance, no shadows, just skin against skin, and truth between them. Jungkook traced a small scar beneath Taehyung's jaw, one he had noticed years ago during a photo shoot but never asked about. Now, he didn't need to. He simply memorized it. Taehyung's fingers brushed through Jungkook's hair. Do you think they'll accept us if we're not subtle anymore? Jungkook let out a dry laugh. They already know. They've always known. Taehyung tilted his head. You sure? They saw it when I looked at you, like you were the only song worth singing. And when you avoided my eyes like they were burning. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, Jungkook whispered. But it still happened. A long pause. I wish I could take it back, Taehyung said. Jungkook shook his head. Don't. If we hadn't broken, we wouldn't know how to hold each other now. And so they did. That night, not out of longing, not out of desperation, but with intention. Slow, tender, deliberate. No camera could capture it. No stage could replicate it. They didn't need a script. They just needed each other. When dawn finally cracked open the sky, neither of them moved. They simply watched the light spill into the room, washing over the sheets, the walls, their entangled limbs. Somewhere across the city, news outlets buzzed with the latest fan theories, dissecting their recent performances. The glances that lingered, the lyrics that felt too specific to be coincidence. A photo had leaked from a staff member, unintentional, unfiltered, of Jungkook fixing Taehyung's collar backstage, their faces inches apart, smiles so soft it didn't look posed. It had gone viral within minutes. Hybe didn't issue a statement. They didn't need to. The fans had already decided. This wasn't a comeback. This was a continuation. During their next stage appearance, the lights dimmed as the final chorus hit. Taehyung reached out without thinking, his hand finding Jungkook's. It wasn't scripted. The stage director later admitted it wasn't planned. But they didn't let go, even as the music faded, even as the lights cut to black. When the audience roared, it wasn't for the song, it was for the truth. Backstage, Jungkook sat on the edge of the dressing table, head tilted back, breathing hard. Taehyung stood in front of him, fingers lightly grazing his jaw. That wasn't subtle, Jungkook murmured. I'm done hiding, Taehyung replied. Jungkook looked at him, really looked, and saw the man he had been waiting for all along. Not the boy in rehearsals, not the idol on magazine covers. The man who had chosen to stay, who had walked through the storm and found his way back. I don't know how to be public about this, Jungkook confessed. But I also don't want to pretend anymore. We'll figure it out, Taehyung said. Together. And they did. Not perfectly, not without backlash. Some fans were confused, some angry, but most were just relieved. Because the love they had seen hiding in glances and lyrics and behind-the-scenes clips was finally being honored. No longer a secret. No longer a maybe. Just real. Just then.
The following morning began not with words but with warmth. Jungkook stirred against the sunlight that spilled lazily through the sheer curtains, his body tangled in a blanket that still held Taehyung's scent, citrus and cedarwood, something nostalgic and sharp, something that belonged to memories but was now finally present again. The pillow beside him was still indented, still warm. He didn't have to reach out to know Taehyung was close. He could feel it in the quiet. In the air no longer thick with unspoken things. He heard the soft creak of the kitchen cupboard, the muffled hum of water boiling, the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic. Taehyung was trying not to wake him, though Jungkook knew he was terrible at being quiet when he was focused. That endearing kind of chaos he used to watch from doorways, chest aching with longing he couldn't name aloud. Now he didn't have to stand at the edge. Now he belonged in the room. He sat up, dragging the blanket with him like a shield, and padded barefoot toward the kitchen, hair messy, voice still stuck somewhere between sleep and disbelief. "You're cooking again." Taehyung looked up from the pan, eyebrows raising with that familiar amused expression. If making toast counts as cooking, then yes, chef of the year. Jungkook chuckled softly and leaned against the doorway, arms folded, gaze never leaving him. It felt new and ancient all at once, this domesticity, this stillness after the storm. "I miss this," Jungkook said. Taehyung flipped the bread in the pan and reached for a plate without breaking eye contact. "I missed you." And it was simple. That was what made it so disarming. No metaphors, no deflection, just truth, plain and raw and offered without fear. After breakfast, they sat on the floor, knees brushing, sharing a blanket and scrolling through fan comments on their latest performance. Some were heartfelt, some ridiculous, some overanalyzed down to the position of their fingers and the angle of their glances. Jungkook smiled at one that read, "They didn't even have to kiss." That handhold said everything. He turned the screen toward Taehyung, who read it with a smirk before glancing up. "Should we just post a selfie and break the internet?" Jungkook raised an eyebrow. "You're bolder than I thought." "I've been quiet too long," Taehyung replied. "I don't want to keep us in the dark." It wasn't about labels. It wasn't about grand declarations. It was about honesty. And when Jungkook nodded, it was with full understanding of the world they were walking into, hand in hand, with nowhere to hide. They took the photo later that afternoon. Nothing posed, nothing polished. Just the two of them sitting cross-legged on the couch, sunlit and soft, a hint of matching rings barely visible as their hands overlapped casually in the foreground. The caption was one word: finally. Within seconds, it exploded. Not just likes, but tidal waves of emotion. Army across continents wept, screamed, celebrated, speculated. Some critics scoffed. Some headlines questioned the implications. But most saw it for what it was, an act of courage, a quiet revolution from two people who had spent too many years trading glances instead of words. HYBE didn't issue a press release. For once, the silence was intentional, respectful. In the weeks that followed, things changed. The air shifted. Interviews became more tender. The world began seeing them not just as performers, but as people flawed, growing, undeniably in love. They weren't trying to prove anything. They weren't defending themselves. They were simply being, and that authenticity was louder than any scandal. One evening, as they prepared for their joint fan event in Busan, Jungkook stood backstage, heart hammering against his ribs. The crowd was already chanting, lights glowing like stars waiting to be mirrored. Taehyung slipped beside him, adjusting the mic on his ear and catching his eye. Nervous. Jungkook exhaled slowly. Not about the show, about how real this is, how easy it would be to lose it. Taehyung took his hand, no longer hiding it. We're not losing anything. We're choosing it every day. And when they stepped onto the stage, the roar that met them wasn't just applause, it was understanding, acceptance, a collective inhale that released the breath fans had been holding for years. They sang not as characters, not as idols, but as people with scars and hope and love between every note. When their voices met on the bridge of their last song, Taehyung reached over, cupped Jungkook's cheek and smiled, not a performance smile, not a rehearsed gesture. A moment, pure. The crowd erupted. After the show, they walked the dark streets of Busan, disguised only by hoodies and baseball caps, fingers entwined, unafraid. Jungkook stopped by the edge of the pier, staring out at the sea, eyes shimmering under the streetlight. I used to come here and imagine you beside me, when things were hardest, when I felt invisible. Taehyung stepped behind him, wrapping arms around his waist, chin resting on his shoulder. And now, Jungkook closed his eyes. Now I don't have to imagine anymore. Time moved as it always does, but the world felt slower with them in it. Together, they crafted a new era, not just for themselves, but for everyone who ever felt like their love had to be hidden. There were obstacles, sure, backlash from conservative voices, doubts from corporate corners, but they met every challenge with grace, with honesty, and with unity. They were no longer afraid to be soft, no longer afraid to be loud when necessary. Years from now, people would look back and say that moment, the hand-hold on stage, the selfie with the caption "finally," the whispered confessions in lyrics, that was the beginning of something. A shift. A love story that didn't follow the rules but rewrote them. And late at night, when the world quieted and the lights went out, Taehyung and Jungkook would lie side by side, breathing in sync, hearts no longer racing out of fear, but beating steady in a rhythm they built from scratch. Because in the end, it wasn't about fame or fanfare. It wasn't even about being remembered. The seasons began to shift subtly, with winter's final breath slowly fading into the fragile bloom of spring. Seoul felt different now, not because the city itself had changed, but because Jungkook walked through it with a different weight on his shoulders, lighter but somehow more grounded. He no longer had to scan over his shoulder every time he laughed too loud near Taehyung in public, no longer had to mute his expressions on stage, no longer had to rewrite his lyrics in metaphors to avoid drawing attention to what was already obvious. It was strange how something so simple, truth, could feel revolutionary. Their days bled into each other in a beautiful rhythm. Sometimes chaotic, sometimes still, always real. Jungkook would wake first, often tangled in sheets, with Taehyung's arm draped across his waist and the sunlight painting gold over their bare shoulders. He would stay there for minutes, memorizing the piece on Taehyung's face, every slow blink and soft exhale, as if the world outside their shared warmth didn't exist. Sometimes, Taehyung would wake first, already sketching in his notepad or plucking notes on his guitar, humming melodies that weren't finished but were always made with Jungkook in mind. They worked on a project together in secret, an EP that wasn't meant for charts, for labels, for anyone else. It was for them. An audio scrapbook of the years they lost and the love they found again. Each track was born from late-night honesty, coffee-stained journal pages, spontaneous harmonies hummed under shared breath, laughter between kisses, tears that fell during take 5 in the vocal booth because sometimes the truth came out when least expected. The songs didn't hide. There was one track, just piano and breathy vocals, where Jungkook sang, "You never said goodbye, you just walked slower until I stopped following." When Taehyung heard it, he didn't speak for 10 minutes. He just reached out, pressed his forehead to Jungkook, and whispered, "I'm sorry I made you feel forgotten." The media eventually caught up to the new narrative, but this time Taehyung and Jungkook weren't concerned. They showed up at events together, not clinging, not boastful, just present, comfortable. Taehyung would adjust Jungkook's collar before interviews. Jungkook would brush something from Taehyung's cheek like it was second nature. And it was. This time they didn't wait for the world to approve. They set their own pace. When asked directly about their relationship in a magazine shoot, Taehyung smiled, looked at Jungkook across the set and said, "I think love teaches you who you really are when no one's looking. He helped me remember." Jungkook simply added, "I've stopped writing songs about pretending." Fans were divided as expected, but the ones who truly listened, the ones who had grown up with them, who had traced every moment of their journey since debut, embraced it with arms wide open. ARMY had always been intuitive. They knew when love was real. They had seen it in every glance, in every wordless exchange during concerts, in the way Jungkook used to hover near Taehyung without touching him, in the way Taehyung would go silent in interviews when Jungkook wasn't beside him. It wasn't news. It was confirmation. As the EP release neared, they planned a small, private showcase. Just 100 fans, no cameras, no press. Only those who had stayed, who had believed, who had waited alongside them through the years of coded messages and what-ifs. The venue was intimate, all black floors and a single spotlight. Jungkook stepped onto the stage first, mic in hand, eyes scanning the room, heart thudding in his chest not from fear but from overwhelming gratitude. Then Taehyung joined him, fingers brushing his as he passed. They didn't speak at first, just let the first chord ring out and the music began. For the next 30 minutes they sang everything they had once been afraid to say. The audience cried quietly, some clutched light sticks, some just held each other. And when the final note faded, Taehyung looked out and said, "This isn't just our story, it's yours too, because you saw us, even when we couldn't see ourselves." Jungkook reached out then, took Taehyung's hand in front of everyone and smiled with tears in his eyes. There was no shame, no caution, just the kind of peace that only comes when you stop running. After the showcase, they stayed until every last fan had left, walking the empty venue side by side. The quiet after the storm. Outside, Seoul glimmered like a dreamscape, alive with movement, unaware of the revolution that had just happened inside those walls. Taehyung stopped beneath a street lamp, turning toward Jungkook, his breath visible in the cool night air. "I used to picture a wedding, fancy, white suit, hundreds of people, a perfect day." Jungkook laughed softly. "That sounds more like a photo shoot than a wedding." "Exactly," Taehyung said. "But now I think the only thing that matters is who's waiting at the end of the aisle." Jungkook tilted his head. "Are you proposing?" Taehyung smirked. "Not yet, but I'm not afraid to anymore." Jungkook stepped closer, wrapped his arms around Taehyung's waist. "Let's promise this instead, that we keep choosing each other, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "I promise," Taehyung said without hesitation. "And when we do get married, I want it to be where it started." Jungkook blinked. "The practice room." "No," Taehyung whispered, his voice warm with memory. "The studio, where I first heard your voice and thought, God, this boy is going to destroy me." Jungkook laughed against his shoulder. "Too late, you already did." Taehyung kissed the crown of his head. "Then let's rebuild each other now." They walked home hand in hand, past flickering neon signs, the scent of tteokbokki from corner stalls, the buzz of traffic and night owls and new lovers. And for the first time in years, Jungkook didn't feel like he was chasing something he could never reach. He had arrived, not at a destination but at a truth, that love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just two people who refused to let go. The following week moved like molasses, slow, deliberate, and strangely gentle. With the EP complete and the showcase behind them, Taehyung and Jungkook found themselves in a rare pocket of stillness. No tour, no back-to-back rehearsals, no late-night meetings in glass-walled boardrooms, just space, time, breath. They didn't waste it. Mornings started with music and ended with wine, their days held together by small rituals that stitched them into something warm and safe. Jungkook took to cooking again, simple dishes, things his mother used to make, while Taehyung rearranged their shared vinyl collection, humming under his breath and sometimes pausing to steal kisses when Jungkook passed too close. It felt like a world built just for them, a fragile utopia tucked away from the chaos of everything else. One evening they sat on the rooftop of their apartment building, legs dangling over the edge, city lights sprawling beneath them like veins of gold. Jungkook passed Taehyung a flask of warm tea, his fingers brushing his in the handoff. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't born of hesitation anymore. It was understanding. Taehyung broke it softly. "Do you ever think about the night I almost married her?" Jungkook didn't look away from the skyline. "Every now and then, but not in the way I used to. It doesn't haunt me anymore. It just reminds me of how far we've come." Taehyung smiled faintly, his profile lit by neon reflections. "You were there. Even when I didn't know how much I needed you, you stayed close, even when I pushed you away." Jungkook finally turned toward him, eyes clear, voice steady. "Because I loved you, and I hated you for not seeing it, and I hated myself for not saying it sooner." Taehyung shifted closer, resting his head against Jungkook's shoulder. "Do you still love me the same way?" Jungkook didn't hesitate. "No." Taehyung tensed slightly, but Jungkook continued. "I love you more, in ways I didn't know were possible back then. It's not infatuation anymore. It's not just longing or adrenaline or nostalgia. It's patience. It's forgiveness. It's waking up next to you and choosing you all over again, even when we're tired, even when we fight, even when the world's watching." Taehyung's breath caught, his fingers curling into Jungkook's sleeve. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do." "No, I don't." Jungkook tilted his head to look at him. "Then let me love you until you believe you do." That night they didn't go back downstairs. They stayed under the stars, wrapped in shared warmth and silent promises, the city buzzing far below them. Spring turned to summer in slow degrees. With it came new conversations, more daring ones, public appearances that no longer dodged questions, subtle but deliberate moments, fingers laced at fan events, knowing glances across red carpets, lyrics that no longer cloaked meaning in metaphors. Their management, surprisingly, stayed quiet, supportive even. Perhaps it was because the world had changed. Perhaps it was because the world had waited long enough. One afternoon, after a particularly tender rehearsal, Jungkook stood in front of the studio mirror, sweat beading down his neck, shirt clinging to his back. Taehyung came up behind him, wrapping arms around his waist and resting his chin on Jungkook's shoulder. "We should get away," Taehyung murmured. "Just you and me, somewhere quiet." "Where?" "I don't care, just not here, not with eyes on us." Jungkook leaned back into him. "Let's do it, just disappear for a while." They chose a coastal town in Italy. Quiet, old, laced with cobblestone streets and ivy-draped balconies. No fans, no cameras, just narrow alleys and sun-drenched mornings. They walked hand in hand like any other couple. They kissed without fear. They danced in the kitchen of their rented villa, barefoot, music echoing off stone walls. They made love like time didn't exist, like they had all of it to themselves. On their third night, Jungkook sat by the balcony sketching lyrics on a napkin. Taehyung approached, a ring box in his hand. Jungkook blinked. What's that? Taehyung didn't kneel. He just opened it. Inside were two simple silver bands. It's not a proposal, he said, voice shaking. Not yet, not officially, but I wanted something that reminds us of this, of now, of us. Jungkook's throat tightened. He reached out, closed the box gently. You didn't have to give me anything. Taehyung leaned in, their foreheads meeting. I'm not giving it to you. I'm giving it to us. Jungkook whispered, put it on me. Taehyung did, slowly, reverently, and Jungkook did the same for him. They wore the rings on their right hands, not to hide, but because it was theirs first, before it ever became the world. The vacation ended too soon, as all perfect things do, but they came back different, not because they had escaped, but because they had returned without running. Back in Seoul, they moved into a new place. Not his, not mine, theirs, walls painted together, furniture debated over, photos pinned to the fridge, mugs labeled with teasing nicknames. Sometimes they still fought, about dumb things, about timing, about who forgot the laundry, but the difference now was that every argument ended in honesty, in soft apologies, in holding each other a little tighter than before. They didn't chase perfection, they chased presence. And in that, they found everything they thought they'd lost. Autumn arrived quietly, not with a storm but with a slow shift. The sky deepened in color, the evenings cooled, and the trees along the Han River began to burn gold and red. Jungkook would wake to the soft rustling of wind against the window, the scent of cinnamon lingering from the candle Taehyung always lit at night. Their home was filled with small, sacred sounds, Taehyung humming in the shower, the low purring of the stray cat they had adopted who now ruled their living room, the quiet clink of spoons and cups during lazy Sunday mornings. It was a symphony of stability, of belonging, and for the first time in his life, Jungkook didn't feel like a guest in his own future. They rarely spoke about what could have been anymore. The wounds were still there, but time had softened the sharpest edges. Taehyung didn't flinch at intimacy. Jungkook didn't withhold his vulnerability. They built a language of touch, of shared glances, of knowing when the other needed silence more than solutions. Their days were stitched together with intention. They didn't need the world's approval anymore. They had each other's. One afternoon, they sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by open photo albums and leftover takeout. Taehyung had been organizing old memories for a small documentary project, their pre-debut days, their wildest tour nights, the exhausted but euphoric studio sessions at dawn. Jungkook flipped through a page and paused. A photo of them at 19, sweaty, laughing, shoulders touching, unaware of what was coming. He stared at it for a long moment. "Do you miss who we were back then?" he asked quietly. Taehyung looked over, his smile slow and thoughtful. "I miss the version of us that didn't know how complicated everything would get, but I don't miss how unsure we were, how much we held back." Jungkook nodded, still staring. "We were in love even then." "We were," Taehyung said softly, "but we didn't know how to protect it." "And now?" Taehyung reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind Jungkook's ear. "Now we're learning, every day." That night after dinner and a quiet walk under a sky littered with stars, they came home to a message from their manager. An offer had arrived, a chance to headline a major global music festival together, just the two of them, a full set. Their sound, their story. For a split second, the old fear flickered in Jungkook's chest. The scrutiny, the pressure, the headlines, but Taehyung's hand slid into his, grounding him. "Only if we do it on our terms," Taehyung said. Jungkook smiled. Then let's write our own stage. The weeks leading up to the performance became a whirlwind. Rehearsals were intense but different now. They didn't feel like they were proving something, they were sharing something. Each beat, each harmony, each lyric crafted with layers of truth, grief, and triumph. The stage design was minimal, black, gold, and white. A single piano, a small string section, and 2 microphones. The night of the performance, backstage buzzed with nerves and light, and people who didn't know what was about to hit them. Jungkook adjusted his earpiece, exhaling slowly. Taehyung stepped behind him, fixing his collar like he always did, and leaned in. "No matter what they say after this," he whispered, "we already won." Jungkook turned to face him, eyes steady. "We already did, the night you stayed." The lights dimmed, the world hushed, and when they stepped onto the stage hand in hand, it wasn't just 2 artists performing. It was 2 souls unraveling a story that had never been allowed to breathe. They opened with the track that had broken them, rewritten now with a final verse that spoke of healing. The crowd didn't cheer during it. They listened, breath held, hearts open. Halfway through the set, during a quiet acoustic piece, Taehyung looked at Jungkook and said into the mic, unscripted, "I spent years writing lyrics for someone I couldn't name. Tonight, I don't want to write metaphors anymore." Jungkook, eyes glassy, leaned into his mic and said, "Then let's be a chorus." The crowd erupted. It was like the earth cracked open. Twitter trended globally within minutes, but none of that mattered to them, not in that moment. Because for the first time in their entire careers, they had sung their truth as themselves. No masks, no choreography to hide behind, just vulnerability, artistry, and love. After the show, the dressing room was flooded with flowers, texts, congratulatory messages from their members and friends. But Jungkook sat on the floor with his back against the wall, eyes closed, sweat still clinging to his skin, chest rising and falling with the weight of what they had just done. Taehyung came over and sank beside him. Neither of them spoke. Then Jungkook whispered, "I'm scared." Taehyung looked at him. "Of what?" "Of how happy I am, of how full this feels, like it's too good, like something going to break." Taehyung leaned his head on his shoulder. "Then let's promise that if anything breaks, we fix it together." Jungkook turned his head slightly, brushing their cheeks. "Promise me you won't disappear again." Taehyung's voice cracked. "I won't, not even if the world tells me to." And when Jungkook finally allowed himself to cry, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming release of holding in love for too long, Taehyung held him through it, no longer afraid of the weight of being seen. The next morning, social media was ablaze. Fans had started a movement, art, threads, fan edits, analysis of lyrics and performances, but more importantly, stories of their own. About love, about fear, about not hiding. The ripple effect of 2 men daring to stop running became a wave of courage for so many who had only ever loved in silence. Jungkook scrolled through the messages quietly, curled under the covers while Taehyung slept beside him. One tweet caught his attention. It read, "They didn't just sing, they healed something in all of us. Maybe love isn't too late. Maybe it's just waiting to be chosen." Jungkook turned off his phone, slid closer to Taehyung, and pressed a kiss to the center of his chest, where his heart beat steady and slow. He had once said it was too late. Now he knew the truth. It never had been. It was only waiting for the moment they were finally ready to stay. The rain started softly, tapping against the windows like fingertips searching for warmth. Jungkook stood in the kitchen, barefoot, hoodie sleeves pulled over his hands, watching steam rise from the kettle. Outside, soul-blurred buildings soaked in gray light, cars trailing water across the street, the occasional umbrella bobbing past in flashes of color. The sky felt heavy, but inside their home it was quiet. Safe. Taehyung had woken with a scratchy voice, and that sleepy pout that never failed to make Jungkook pause whatever he was doing just to kiss it away. He was curled on the couch now, blanket around his shoulders, cat tucked into his lap, eyes flickering between his book and the soft jazz Jungkook had cued on the speakers. Every now and then he'd glance up and just watch Jungkook move, like he couldn't quite believe this was their life now, that this slowness, this warmth, this peace was something they'd built with their own hands. Jungkook poured the tea and brought it over, crouching beside him, resting his chin on the edge of the couch. Still hurting. Taehyung took the cup, nodded. My throat's mad at me. You hit some of those notes a little too hard, Jungkook teased. You were trying to show off. I was trying to sing to you, Taehyung replied softly. I forgot everyone else was there. Jungkook's breath caught for a second before he smiled, his eyes creasing the way they only did when he truly felt safe. Good, because I was only listening to you. They stayed like that for hours, reading, dozing, murmuring thoughts that didn't need to be deep to matter. There was something sacred in the ordinary. They had chased stages and headlines and adrenaline for so long that stillness felt like a radical act. In the late afternoon, the rain turned heavier and the city became a blur beyond the fogged glass. Jungkook lit candles Taehyung liked, lavender, bergamot, a hint of something warm like sandalwood. They sat at the piano together, not to practice, not to record, just to play. Taehyung leaned into Jungkook's shoulder, harmonizing with a melody they hadn't written yet. It was just sound, just being. And then Jungkook whispered, "Let's leave for a while." Taehyung blinked. Leave where? Anywhere, the mountains, the coast. Let's go where no one knows our names for a bit. Taehyung tilted his head, a soft smile forming. Are you running? Jungkook shook his head. No, I just want to live with you in every version of this world. They packed the next day. Light, no schedules, no managers, just a shared playlist, old sweaters, cameras, and books. They rented a small cabin in the mountains north of the city, secluded, quiet, the kind of place where time didn't move the way it did in the city. Their days were slow. Mornings with breath visible in the air, coffee held between cold fingers, boots sinking into damp soil as they wandered through trails. They took photos, but not for posting, just for remembering. Taehyung carried a sketchbook. He'd stop in the middle of a hike to draw a tree, a bird, Jungkook's profile against the sunlight. Jungkook watched him like he was watching something sacred, and at night they'd sit by the fire, wrapped in the same blanket, legs tangled, sipping mulled wine and sharing stories they'd never told before, fears from childhood, dreams they'd buried, the precise moment they knew they loved each other. Jungkook admitted his was during a tour stop in Osaka, years ago, when Taehyung had walked into his hotel room at 3 a.m. just to say he couldn't sleep without hearing Jungkook's voice. Taehyung said it was the first time he saw Jungkook cry backstage, not from pain, but from music, and all he wanted to do was hold him forever. The snow came suddenly one morning, blanketing everything in white silence. They made breakfast in silence, watching the world disappear in softness outside their window. Jungkook reached out, held Taehyung's hand across the table. This, he said, this is everything I didn't think I'd get to have with you. Taehyung squeezed his hand. We have it now, we hold it carefully, and we don't let go. That afternoon, they stepped outside, snow crunching under their boots, breath misting between them. Jungkook brought his camera and took dozens of photos, Taehyung mid-laugh, Taehyung looking up at the trees, Taehyung with snowflakes in his lashes. And in return, Taehyung captured Jungkook's wide-eyed wonder, the way he tipped his head back to catch snow on his tongue, the softness in his face that only came when he forgot the world entirely. They built a snowman, badly, but they laughed so hard they couldn't breathe, collapsing into the snow, cheeks red, hearts light. Later, curled in front of the fire, Taehyung rested against Jungkook's chest, fingers drawing slow patterns on his arm. If we got married, he said suddenly, voice barely audible over the crackle of the flames, would it be quiet like this? Just us? Jungkook kissed the top of his head. Yes, but I'd still want to dance with you, even if it's just in the living room. We'd probably mess up the steps. Doesn't matter, Jungkook smiled. We'd still be in sync. And that night without music, they did dance, slow, barefoot firelight casting shadows around them as they swayed. There were no vows, no cameras, no rings exchanged. Just eye contact and silent promises, just two people who had fought like hell to be here, who had chosen love not once, but again and again, even when it was hard, even when it felt impossible. When they returned to the city a week later, nothing had changed, but everything had. They walked differently, held each other differently, spoke with a new softness. They weren't hiding anymore, not from the world and not from themselves. Their members noticed it first. Jimin grinned and said, "You two look like a finished song." Namjoon offered no questions, just a knowing nod. Yoongi gave them both a rare, genuine hug and muttered something about peace looking good on them. An army, they embraced it, because they had always known, and now they were finally allowed to celebrate it without reading between the lines. Taehyung and Jungkook began to live like they were no longer waiting for permission, and the world somehow became softer in return. The first real test came not in the quiet of their shared home, not in the stillness of snow-draped mornings or candlelit rooftop evenings. It came under stage lights, in front of 20,000 people, at the year-end award show they once avoided because the weight of the spotlight was too much to bear together. But this time, they stepped into it willingly. Not as a subunit, not as members sharing a set list, but as artists claiming a shared truth. Their performance was scheduled last, the closing act, the moment meant to burn into the audience's memory like an imprint they wouldn't shake for weeks. Jungkook stood backstage in a tailored black suit, hair brushed back, throat tight not with fear but anticipation. He could hear the buzz of the crowd beyond the curtains, their chants, the growing electricity in the air. But it was Taehyung's hand that steadied him, warm against the small of his back, grounding him like he always did when words weren't enough. "Ready?" Taehyung murmured, eyes gleaming beneath the stage lights. Jungkook nodded, "Always if it's with you." And when the music began, soft piano notes drifting like snowfall, the entire venue seemed to hold its breath. They didn't start with choreography. They started with presence. Two silhouettes in the dark, slowly lit by amber light, standing face to face as the opening lines unfurled like a secret finally spoken. The lyrics were their story, fragmented, aching whole. The chorus soared with heartbreak, with hope, with the trembling vulnerability of two men who had stopped apologizing for wanting more than just glances across a crowded room. By the bridge, when Jungkook's voice cracked on the words, "I would have waited 1,000 lifetimes if you just said my name," the silence was thunderous. And then Taehyung stepped forward, reached out and took his hand. Not a metaphor, not a scripted gesture. Just love, raw and open and unashamed. The crowd didn't cheer at first, they just watched, like they were afraid any sound would break the spell. But as the final note rang out and the lights faded to a soft glow, the arena erupted. Cheers, sobs, 1,000 lightsticks waving like stars. Taehyung bowed, Jungkook followed, hand in hand, together. Backstage, the silence between them was different now, full, complete. Taehyung turned, voice hoarse from singing. "You didn't hesitate this time." Jungkook looked at him, eyes shining. "Neither did you." They didn't need to speak more than that. The truth had already been sung. In the days that followed, articles exploded. Analysts dissected the lyrics. Commentators speculated on every movement, but they didn't respond. They didn't correct anyone. They simply posted one photo, black and white, grainy, taken backstage. Their hands intertwined. The caption read, "No edits needed." That post broke records. But it wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about truth. They began to write again, not just for themselves, but for others who had stories buried under silence. They opened a small label project within their company dedicated to artists from marginalized backgrounds. Taehyung produced. Jungkook mentored vocals. They poured everything into it, time, emotion, sleepless nights. They knew what it meant to be unseen. They were determined to change that for someone else. Their love became less about grand gestures and more about the everyday. Grocery runs that ended with Taehyung feeding Jungkook strawberries in the parking lot. Late-night drives where they shared earbuds and stared out at the passing city. Arguments over nothing that always ended with whispered apologies and warm skin against skin. They built routines that didn't look like fantasy, but felt like home. And slowly, the world stopped questioning. Their fans didn't just support them. They protected them. They learned to tell the difference between curiosity and cruelty. They knew how to shield, how to love from a distance, how to send letters that said, "Thank you for not hiding anymore." The rest of the group never pushed, never intruded. They were proud quietly. Jimin once sent them both a voice note after a performance that simply said, "You looked like freedom." Years passed in chapters, new music, quiet winters, a shared dog, a second apartment in Tokyo. They never married in the traditional sense. No public vows, no church, no tuxedos. But one morning during a trip to Norway, they stood at the edge of a glacier lake, fog curling around them, breath visible in the crisp air, and Taehyung pulled out 2 rings, not to ask a question, but to answer one that had lived in their bones for years. "Just so we don't forget," he said, "even when the world changes, even if this all disappears." Jungkook slid the band onto his finger. "This won't disappear." Taehyung smiled. "But even if it does, we'll find it again. We always do." The rings weren't flashy. They didn't need to be. They were worn always on chains or fingers, on stages or at home, not for the world, but for them. Because in the end, the love they found wasn't the kind that demanded to be seen. It was the kind that survived. The kind that stayed. The kind that no longer needed to say it's too late now, because it had already arrived, fully, fearlessly. And this time, it was never leaving.